Ron Chrisley is Professor of Cognitive Science and Artificial Intelligence at the University of Sussex, where he's also the Director of the Centre for Cognitive Science. His work spans artificial intelligence and the philosophy of mind, with particular interests in the conceptual foundations of AI, machine consciousness, embodiment, and the relation between artificial and natural minds. So, Ron, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
Tell me, can machines think? I mean, we've made some incredible progress with ChatGPT and those kind of large language models, but will they ever be able to experience the same kind of things that we as humans do?
Great question. And a great question to start off with. I will revert to my philosophical training by saying, well, in order to answer that question, we need to look carefully at even at the few terms that you use. So machines and think, right? So a lot of people maybe have heard of John Searle, who is a
Yeah.
philosopher who criticized the ideas. He's thought of creating this argument that criticizes the idea that a machine could understand, but if you and therefore think. But if you look at his writings, he's very careful, and he says, "So can a machine think, or can a machine understand?" And he says, "Well, yeah, of course it can. Of course a machine can, because we're machines and we think." So on one definition of machine that's very broad, we know that machines can think if you think of ourselves in a particular way. But that's not really what most people mean, right? They mean something like, getting at what they mean is a bit tricky, but I think that what people mean these days is, well, usually has computation has something to do with it. So could that kind of machine think? And even Searle even says, well, yes, a digital computer could think because our brains could be viewed as digital computers. So he even goes that far. Some people would push back and say, well, clearly our brains aren't digital computers, but that now we get into different debates. Um, I think for most people, that question, can a machine think, has to do with could something that we create, not by giving birth, but through design, something we create that's based on the technologies we know about now, roughly, or maybe something in the near future that descends from them. Could that thing think? And Searle even says, well, yes, even an artifact, a digital computer that we build, even that could think. It's just that he argues that it couldn't think because it's a computer. So it might think in addition to being a computer, or it might be that computation is part of the reason why it thinks, but it can't be a thinker solely because it's running the right program. You need something else. That's his view.
Well,
So I think that, by bringing up some of those distinctions, maybe we've already got a little bit further along in understanding the question and therefore reaching the answer.
well, let me ask it this way, the same question but in a different format. How would we ever know if a machine could think? Now, let me take you back to Turing and the Turing test, because he's very famous, of course, for saying, well, we can know if a machine thinks if we can't tell the difference between whether the output is coming from a human being or the output is coming from a machine itself, of a computer. Then he says that is a sufficient indication to us that the machine is thinking. What do you make of that? I know Searle didn't like that. What did you make of it?
Right. As a matter of fact, Searle came up with a counterexample of something that he says, okay, suppose this program generates behavior that's indistinguishable from that, say, of a Chinese speaker. Nevertheless, he thought and he proved that that doesn't necessarily mean that it really is understanding Chinese or intelligent, because he imagined himself implementing that program by hand, and he imagined in this thought experiment that he could do all that computation himself. He's the computer now, and he wouldn't come to understand Chinese thereby. He would just be manipulating these meaningless to him symbols and following the rules, but he would never come to understand what was being discussed. So he thought that was a counterexample, a proof that Turing was wrong, that you couldn't, if you think of Turing as saying that what it is to be intelligent is to pass the Turing test. I don't really think that's what Turing thought, but that's a matter of scholarship. I think we can, a lot of people think the behavior is the only thing that matters. And I think I'm on Searle's side. I don't think his argument's that great, but I am on his side that the behavior alone isn't really what constitutes intelligence. It's having some kind of internal structure that constitutes having intelligence. So that's where he and I would part ways. I would say if you generate the behavior for the right causal computational reasons and you're hooked up to the world in the right way, then I think you wouldn't have any good grounds for denying intelligence to that system. So one thing you can think about is on what basis do we really attribute intelligence to each other? And would it be fair to have a higher standard for a machine than, or an alien species that we encounter for that matter, than for other humans? And I don't think the biology, the sameness of our biology is really a good grounds for saying yes or no, because we don't know which parts of the biology are essential to really being an understander or intelligent system and which ones aren't. So I think the concept of intelligence has to do with how you respond to the world and the information you receive from the world. And
It's
that
not
would
about
be the
it's not
criterion.
about the hardware then. It's not about whether it's silicon or carbon based reasoning. It's about something quite different from that. But
Yes, yeah, because I think that one good if someone isn't persuaded about the irrelevance of the hardware, I mean, it's not irrelevant in that the hardware has to be the right kind of hardware to generate those that behavior for those right causal reasons. But here's the thought experiment I use to convince me that you shouldn't go down lower than you need to into the when I say lower, I mean down into the
yeah,
implementation detail and say that that's where the difference is between really understanding and faking it. The thought experiment I use is that what if it turns out that we come up with this some neuroscientists or whoever think that the in understanding is at the biological level, they come up with some account and they say, yes, this is the place in the brain where it's these kinds of features of biological processing that you have to have in order to be intelligent. That's why the machines aren't intelligent. That's why maybe even those aliens aren't intelligent. And I would be afraid that they might, because I have to have brain surgery or something, they open up my skull and look inside and go, "Oh, well, Ron doesn't have those, so I guess Ron's not intelligent or an understander." I never, the biology should never trump the behavior generated through the right causal reasons connected to the world in the right way. If somebody has that, who are we to say, well, sorry, you're not implementing it with the right hardware, so we're not going to count you as an understander? That I think is a bridge too far. I think that's just a mistake.
would you view the new AI that we have based on large language models? Would you view them as either intelligent or potentially intelligent, or would you just say, with John Searle, no doubt, these large language models are just like a Chinese room looking up dictionaries and nothing else than that?
So that's, I think we're in this fascinating situation right now where these questions that I had been considering for decades and people have been considering for decades before me, maybe even hundreds of years,
Hmm.
these questions are now not just informed by, but they're actually reshaped by the new technologies we're developing. So I think the concepts that we had up until, say, 1950 or whatever were the concepts that we got by with given the natural environment we were in. But now we've invented new things. We've put new things into the world and new kinds of situations, new kinds of informational situations that our old conceptual scheme or vocabulary maybe isn't fine-grained enough to deal with. So if you try to use the old categories like is it conscious or is it not? Is it understanding or is it not? Is it intelligent or not? it might be you don't get a very useful answer, and we maybe need new, more subtle distinctions and finer categories in order to characterize the different abilities that machines have versus us or other creations we have. So, getting back to the specific case of LLMs, we might say that we are discovering there's a new kind of intelligence or understanding that we hadn't encountered before, where you are able to respond fluently and appropriately to questions as if that normally would require understanding in the case of a human. And you might even do it better than many humans. So the machine might be able to understand that question better than a lot of humans can understand it. In this understand with an asterisk sense of understand. So
Yeah, I mean,
in the
this.
ability to provide appropriate responses to and be sensitive to the exact terminology used, the syntax used, the context of the utterance or the question. So I don't want to say that it's achieved everything that we employ when we understand something. There isn't any association with its own life or any experience. It isn't drawing on intuition. It's there are all kinds of things in which machine understanding differs from our understanding. So I wouldn't say we've replicated human understanding, but
I
it
mean,
is a kind of understanding.
the key word you're using all the time here is understanding,
Mm, mm.
and the question really is understanding taking place? Is what's happening in a large language model purely at the level of syntax, or has it moved up to the level of semantics? And if so, how does it do that?
That's a good way of looking at it because and the answer is it has multiple parts. Some of the words that we use and the concepts we express with those words are general, and they're like about categories. They aren't about any particular one thing in front of us, like the concept of dog or concept of I don't know, holiday or even Tuesday or what. These are concepts. So the words that I mentioned there express they have a meaning. And I think maybe their meaning is largely exhausted by how they are used appropriately in a sentence, right? Say, but contrast that with other terms that we use or phrases like this mug. Now, that phrase has a meaning. There's the general concept mug, which you might be able to grasp just by understanding how that word is used with all the other English words. But if you want to understand what a speaker is talking about when they say this mug, then you have to have some ability to, well, when we talk about infants lacking object permanence, that kind of concept, the idea of an object existing and what it is for an object to exist relative to you, and what would it be for you to be able to distinguish two objects that are qualitatively very similar, but they're actually distinct. You need to be able to track them in space time and say that's my mug, even though it looks exactly like yours because I picked it up from where I set it down, whereas yours has been over there. So the idea of an object being able to understand that notion and and to have the ability to track objects in real space time machines, the LLMs that we have currently aren't very good at that. If normally they don't have that at all. Some people are hooking them up to sensors and effectors, and maybe they're beginning to get the beginnings of that. But
I
there
was
are parts of language that they don't understand because they don't know how to connect up with the world in the right way.
so in other words, if I understand what you're saying, your idea is that in order to have understanding, as we understand the word as human beings, in order to have understanding, you have to have an experience. If I have a mug, I have to have an experience of holding a mug, feeling what it can contain, seeing the colors of the mug. My experience of the mug is then connected to my use of the word mug because I can then relate those two things together. But without that experience, the machine or the large language model, it doesn't have that kind of experience. So it's very limited and therefore maybe not understanding, certainly in the sense that we do.
Right. The way I understand understanding in a very quick sense is that when I understand you, I have first of all some idea that you're trying to communicate something to me. So I have an idea of another person's point of view that's different from mine, and that person is trying to express something. And I also have, if I successfully understand, I know what it is that you're trying to convey. And in general, if you say something very general, that knowledge of what you're trying to convey might be derivable just from looking at lots and lots of language and the situations in which it's said. But when you are trying to say something about a particular thing in your environment, say, like this, a mug near you, then for me to know what it is, to know which thing you're talking about, that cannot be learned just from looking at lots of language. That requires looking at how, having experience with how language relates to the world, and also maybe requires having certain kinds of abilities to manipulate the world. So I really won't understand you in that deeper sense, and the LLM won't understand you in that deeper sense if it doesn't have those components I just mentioned. And I think LLMs are very far away from having they don't have any concept of their user as being another mind that they're interacting with. They don't have an understanding of that user having a physical world where objects are in it. And yeah, so we're very far away from that right now.
Are you saying that in order to have understanding, then you need to have qualia? In other words, the experience, the sensation, the something which you can connect to, which you've personally experienced in order to tie it down to what we're talking about. And do machines have that? Or could they ever have that? And could you explain what that is? That because it's a term which I've
Right.
just thrown in, but
You've
which
brought up the
probably,
keyword.
yeah,
Okay, so right,
I may not even pronounced it right. Never mind. Go ahead.
no, you did. You did. It's so yeah. The people who talk about consciousness from like an academic, philosophical perspective or from a technical perspective often find it useful to use this Latin term qualia, which is the plural of quale, and I'll use the plural. Qualia are just the aspects of our experience that give that experience its character, what it's like to have that experience. So the examples people use are maybe the way that red looks when I look at a particular red object, or the way the wine tastes when I sip wine, or the way the sunset looks, or sound. Any of the experiences we have don't just have the causal effects of making me say, "Hey, there's a nice sunset." They also have, people claim, this character, what it's like to actually have that experience, and on some views that explains why we say what we say. The reason why we say "what a nice sunset" is because it has this character as opposed to having this character. So it relates very easily to, I think, a common sense view or an easily understandable view of what consciousness is. And it's just
Can I
a
have
term that helps us
understanding?
get a grip on consciousness and discuss it better. But you asked about the relationship between it and understanding,
Yeah.
and that's for we can mention I can mention Searle again.
Mm.
Searle thought that they go hand in hand. So the way he knew he wasn't understanding Chinese is because he just checked to see how things felt for him, and he didn't have that qualitative character of understanding a language when he was doing this manipulation. He didn't have any qualitative character of understanding that there was a speaker that he was interacting with. So he said there is no understanding because there's no qualia of understanding going on. So that's how some people say you can't really have understanding if you don't also have the qualitative character of understanding. So now maybe, and even to understand understanding, we need to go to look at consciousness and look at qualia, and try to understand whether a machine could ever have qualia, or whether people have qualia, or how, or what it is about us that means we do, or things like that.
Tell us about the hard problem of consciousness and how it ties in with qualia.
Right. So David Chalmers put a name on this gap that's been recognized for a long time between our way of understanding some things looking like us physically and our way of understanding them as experiencing things. So we have this view that there is consciousness, but it seems to be a mystery how um, why it is that something that has the brain that I have also has an experience of the kind that I have. As a matter of fact, it's a mystery that it has any experiences at all. From the physicalist perspective, we could, the view goes, we could easily imagine physical things going on and organisms living their lives and people even having conversations without there being any qualia, any what its likeness. There's just the behavior, just the physical happenings.
This
And
is the
so
zombie,
this,
the zombie approach to.
right. So the philosophical zombie uh, uh, is meant to capture this gap very strikingly. It seems that we can imagine a creature who behaves just like we do, or just like me, say, but unlike me, there isn't any internal life. There's no what its likeness for that zombie. And that's the definition of a philosophical zombie, something that behaves as if it's conscious, but isn't actually conscious. Um, Many people, including David Chalmers, think that this is clearly conceivable. It's not a logical contradiction to suppose there could be somebody, there could be an organism that behaves just like me, but doesn't have, but not just behaves, but also even has my internal physical composition, just like me, and isn't conscious. Um, and so, therefore, that logical possibility alone is enough to create the hard problem of not seeing what it is about the physical that necessitates the experiential or the conscious realm.
Isn't the nature of the problem such that if such a thing existed, a philosophical zombie, which looked all the world like you, but didn't have your sensations and feelings and internal thoughts and ideas, you couldn't tell the difference from outside, that it's not possible by any test or means to determine which is one and which is the other. Oh, I've got that wrong.
No, no. I mean, there are different varieties of zombies. I don't want to attribute one of these views to David Chalmers and get it wrong, but there's the merely behavioral zombie, which I think is a little less interesting because I think most people could imagine, well, like Searle's thought experiment, you could imagine getting the behavior right. But what's interesting is whether the internal organization is correct. Searle, to his credit, actually even imagines getting the internal organization on a computational level exactly right. So the states that Searle goes through when processing the Chinese symbols that he doesn't understand are exactly by hypothesis, the kinds of states that a Chinese speaker goes through. But just simulating going through those states doesn't actually reproduce the understanding of Chinese, according to Searle's argument. So you could keep moving further in to get your zombie to be more and more like me, and then say, well, what if it's actually molecule for atom, identical to me? Can you now imagine that it still lacks consciousness? And I guess one of the points of I'm not really a fan of the zombie argument. I don't really feel the bite of of that argument as keenly as other people do. But I think one thing it's supposed to illuminate is that where you jump off or where you think identity of that physical nature would have to imply identity of consciousness, that reveals where you think the solution to the hard problem will be. If you think it's in if it was biologically identical, um, that would guarantee consciousness, but it doesn't matter how the biological, it doesn't matter whether it's this ion or that ion in the synaptic cleft between my neurons. It doesn't matter whether it's calcium or potassium. As long as it does the right biological work, then I'd still be conscious. That means that you think it's at the biological level, but not below the biological level. But if you're at the computational functional level, you could say, well, it could be realized in biological hardware, but it might also be realized. So at some point, many people are going to say, well, if it's identical at that level, then no, we can't imagine it really being not conscious if I'm conscious.
Of course,
So yeah.
Descartes did, and the Cartesian dualism, of course, is what this distinguishes between, isn't it? Either you believe that everything is just material and biological, and if you put an identical copy of something together, then you would expect it to have the consciousness that the first thing did. But if you're a dualist, then you might say, well, no, it can be physically identical, molecule for molecule, but it still lacks that vital spark of consciousness which is not present.
Right. And some people have taken the zombie argument and the hard problem to signal the falsity of the physicalistic view, which I pretty much assume in my work. So they'd say, well, these problems are just they derive from the fact that you're starting from a false premise that physicalism is true. There's more than the physical in our world, and that's why no matter how much you fix the physical world, you haven't fixed the mental world or the world of qualia. So I find I take as I'm happy to eventually conclude dualism if I find that there is a good argument for it, or if every possible physicalist approach fails. But I still hold out hope that there's a way of understanding how consciousness and even how qualia might be part of the physical world.
Of course, a lot of people in the past used to believe in dualism simply because they wanted to believe in an afterlife of some kind. And although the body might die, you have some element then which exists and continues, kind of like the real you. But I would think that modern philosophers these days, very few of them, if any, are dualists. Is that fair comment?
I think I think you might be right, but it's gaining in popularity. So I
Oh, right.
think that there are more maybe more dualists than you might imagine, and also one particular view is becoming more and more discussed and perhaps more popular amongst
Panpsychism?
professional. Take the word right
Yeah,
out of my
I've
mouth. Yeah.
spoken to a number
So.
of people who kind of believe in a kind of panpsychism. I'm quite surprised at that. People like Ian McGilchrist or Donald Hoffman or people like that. Rupert
Well,
Sheldrake, of course.
Philip Goff has to be mentioned in this context as he's one of the most
Yeah,
outspoken proponents of
fair enough.
panpsychism. Maybe also Galen Strawson. But I resist. Like I said, I want my default assumption to be let's see if we can make sense of
Yeah,
everything from a
that,
naturalistic, physicalistic perspective. And if we can't, then all
yeah,
right, let the chips fall
that's
where they
fair
may.
enough.
But the I think the key move in understanding how qualia can be part of the physical world is to take a revisionistic approach. So the alternatives so far have seemed to have been either you take qualia seriously and you look at their problematic aspects, you can't really understand them physicalistically, so therefore dualism is true, or you see the problems with qualia and you say, well, they can't be understood physicalistically, so since I'm a physicalist, they don't exist. So you get the illusionists, or
Yeah.
what used to be called eliminativists, people who would eliminate
Can, can
qualia
we take
talk
this?
from our metaphysics. Those seemed people have presented it as if those are the only two options, and I've been trying to chart a middle course.
I want to get onto that middle course shortly, but can we take this step by step? So we'll just
Sure.
make it clear. So someone called Daniel Dennett, he's a famous philosopher. I've got a couple of his books. Um, he claims that qualia don't exist. Can you run by us the argument that he has to say that the taste of coffee, the sensation of seeing red, the feelings of love, all those kind of things are illusions and we must eliminate them. Why does he say that?
So I think he like me presupposes a physicalistic perspective, and so if he encounters something that it cannot be integrated with the physicalist perspective and makes no difference from the physicalistic perspective, that includes makes no difference for behavior, makes no difference for whatever memory, action, function, scientific study from a physicalistic perspective. If none of that, if it's a fifth wheel that makes no difference at all, then he says it isn't real. It should be eliminated.
What is it
So he
about
thinks
qualia that
qualia fit that category. He thinks by definition, qualia are defined to be out of the physical space, and therefore he says so much the worse for qualia because the only stuff that exists is this stuff
because they're
here.
meant to be I think he brings out four qualities of them. Privacy for one, that's out of a physical space, isn't it? You can't get at something which is entirely private. Intrinsic is another one, yeah, which means that
So
it's
yeah,
not
I call it
dependent.
the PI3 approach. So one P and three I's. Privacy, or I say I'm an American originally, so
That's all
privacy,
right.
privacy, intrinsicness, immediacy, and ineffability.
Yeah,
Privacy is just the way I understand it is it's the inability for others to know what it
what you
is
know.
I'm experiencing it, at least in the sense that I'm experiencing it. Let's go to ineffability next. Ineffability is therefore the inability for me to communicate to you what it is that I'm experiencing. You can see how they're closely related because if I could communicate it to you, then that would mean you would know. So privacy implies ineffability.
Yeah.
And the other two are intrinsicness, which says there's nothing this experience has its character, its qualia, um, intrinsically. There's nothing, no other relationship that it has to have to something in the, say, the physical world or to a part of my brain or whatever, in order for it to have that quality. It just has it as an intrinsic property. If you change its relation to other things, its quality doesn't change. It's just has the same quality, but now it's caused by or causes different things. And then the last one is sort of a flip, sort of the epistemological flip side of that. Immediacy means I don't need to do anything else. There's no mediator between me and my qualia. I don't have to infer what my qualia are by noticing something else and then reasoning. I immediately, in an unmediated way, not in terms of time, but in terms of not being mediated by something else, I immediately, in an unmediated way, know what qualia I am experiencing. So those are the four. Even though he was criticizing the concept of qualia, he is to be commended for very carefully characterizing the position of the foe that he wants to attack. And I've adopted when I talk about qualia or think about qualia, I've pretty much adopted the view that he sketches of these four properties of what's essential to qualia in his paper Quining Qualia, which was maybe it's Quine was a philosopher who liked to get rid of things that you didn't need to have in your metaphysics. So he was doing that Quining Qualia, getting rid of them because they don't fit in with his physicalist metaphysics.
So he got rid of them or eliminated them by saying that none of these things were physical and therefore we shouldn't bother with them. And I think you liken that to phlogiston, or phlogiston, the so-called chemical everyone thought existed back in the 18th century and was shown not to exist. But you have a different argument. You say that there's a fallacy in just getting rid of qualia in that way. Can you explain that?
Yes, I think I agree with a lot of his insights about the incompatibility between some of these you call it second order properties, the properties of the properties of experience. So qualia are the properties of experience, and then this PI3, those four things are properties of these qualia. So anyway, I agreed with his analysis to some extent that there's a tension or incompatibility between those properties and being a physical thing, but he went too quick when he said, well, therefore, qualia should be eliminated. And the reason why I thought he was too quick is because I looked at the history of science and how we eliminated certain terms from our vocabulary because we found that they didn't refer to anything. Like you mentioned, this substance phlogiston that used to be part of an alchemical chemistry of substances. It was because of gold was conceived of as a compound, and one of the components of gold was phlogiston, and phlogiston explained why gold was shiny and explained why it had other properties. So the alchemists were trying to do a chemistry, but unfortunately, or whatever, they didn't get it right. They postulated the existence of this substance, phlogiston, and it doesn't exist. Gold is an element. There isn't any com compound that combines with phlogiston to produce shininess and produce gold. So there's nothing in our successor chemistry or metaphysics there's no place for for no role for phlogiston to play. It's eliminated. We have no need for that hypothesis. So we thought, the alchemists could say, well, look, you're looking at phlogiston right now. It's in that gold right there. They were mistaken. But we didn't eliminate gold, right? So we were wrong about gold. We thought it was a compound, or alchemists thought it was a compound, and now we know it's an element. But we don't say, well, we have to eliminate gold because there's nothing in our successor chemistry that corresponds to gold. No, there is something. It's just that there's gold in our successor chemistry, but we just admit that we got it wrong about what its properties were. It wasn't a compound. It wasn't composed of phlogiston. So I'm proposing that it might be the same way with qualia. So then it might be right that there's nothing that has those properties, just like there's nothing that has the properties of gold before. There wasn't something that was a compound. Nevertheless, we might be able to find a successor thing, qualia, in our new metaphysics that's right, that explains consciousness, but we just say we got some of the properties wrong. Some of these PI3 properties, we believed they were true of qualia, and actually we were wrong about that. So if we can do that, then maybe we could find a place for qualia. We will have found a place for qualia in our successor metaphysics. If I could just add on one condition, that supposes that unlike phlogiston and like gold, we're able to find something that explains all our previous qualia talk. So with gold, we can find the thing that says, yeah, when we were pointing at gold before, we were pointing at this stuff. With phlogiston, you can't do that. There isn't anything in our successor metaphysics you can say, when we were talking about phlogiston, we were talking about this stuff. There isn't anything like that. So unlike most people, I don't know if maybe there are other people in this debate, but as far as I know, I'm a lone voice crying in the wilderness saying that whether or not qualia are to be eliminated or whether they're to be found to be a part, to be real and found to be a part of our successor metaphysics, that's an empirical question. So we can't tell from our armchairs whether or not qualia are real or whether they are an illusion. We need to do the science. And if we do the science and we find something that plays the same role as qualia, but doesn't have the properties that we thought it did, then we would have vindicated its metaphysics, and therefore it's like gold. But if we look inside the brain and we don't find anything that is a unified cause of our qualia talk, then we should take the falsity of the incompatibility of those four properties and the fact that we can't find anything that is even in the vicinity. We should take that as a sign that it should be eliminated. But thinking that you can solve that now from your armchair is like thinking you could solve whether or not phlogiston or gold should be kept or eliminated, whether you could do that from your armchair. You can't. You need to go and try and do the science.
So what science could possibly be done? I mean, you mentioned we could search inside the brain to see if there's something which creates qualia, but the other side of the
Oh,
coin,
no, one correction, if I can interrupt you there.
yeah,
It's not that it creates qualia, it's that explains our qualia beliefs and our qualia judgments,
doesn't
and our
that
qualia
create it?
talk.
I mean, the sensation that I've got of redness or of the taste of coffee, surely something must create it, unless it doesn't exist.
Right. So assuming that it can be found, what we're looking for is not something that creates qualia. We're looking for qualia itself. So qualia will be, if physicalism is correct, there will be something. Because on our everyday view, it's the qualia that makes me say, "Hey, that's a beautiful sunset." It's the qualia that makes me go, that tastes terrible," or "Ouch, that's painful." So what we need to do is find something that plays that causal role in behavior, including our qualia talk, and especially our tendency to say things like, my qualia are private, my qualia are intrinsic, immediate, ineffable. If you can explain what it is about this, I think it's probably going to be some kind of computational state, some functional state. If you can explain what it is about this and how it's hooked up to the rest of my mental economy, uh, explain why I think of it as private or why I think of it as intrinsic or immediate or ineffable, then I think it will be irresistible to conclude that you have found qualia, because you'll found, just like you find the substance that made us go, hey, there's some gold, you will have found the thing that makes us think, hey, there's something that's private, immediate, ineffable, and intrinsic. That is qualia.
You cleverly turn this idea on its head by saying we could look at it from the other point of view, that can we create a machine which can at least do the easy problem, which is, create the ideas of not qualia itself, but the idea of sensations or seeing or those kind of what is the mechanism for seeing? We already have things and cameras attached to computers which can see in certain kinds of ways and heat sensors and such like. But your idea, if I understood it correctly, and probably you're best to explain it, is to take the easy problem and then develop from that the notion of creating a computer which believes that it has these properties of privacy and intrinsicness, and then ask the question, can we create something which naturally evolves those things? Can you say something about how that might be used to test the idea?
Yeah, I think
And have I got it right?
no, you did. When I think about these issues, I'm sometimes amazed at how much. Let's take my opponent here to be somebody who thinks that machines can't have consciousness and they can't have qualia. I mean, remember, I still think it's an empirical issue whether qualia exist, but um, let's assume for the moment that they do exist. And now we know we have them, but now the question is, could a machine ever have them? I find it amazing that the opponents are usually willing to give me so much. They would say, "Oh yeah, suppose it behaves just like something that's conscious. It talks." I mean, that would mean it would talk about consciousness. That means it would be inclined to say things like, "Yes, my qualia are private." And assuming that you're not just the machine isn't just doing that on the behavioral level, it's doing it on a functional level, computational level for the same reasons we are. It's going through the same sequence of states. The reason why it thinks that its qualia are private and intrinsic and ineffable is by hypothesis the same reason why we do. It's not because of there are any qualia there, it's because this particular state is playing a particular role in its cognitive life, which makes it think that that's a private thing, or makes it think that that's a. So I'm amazed when they are willing to give me all that, and because I don't think there's really much of interest left. If you create a device that thinks it's conscious and behaves exactly like it's conscious, and the reason why it thinks it's conscious is for all the same functional reasons that we think that we're conscious, I don't think anybody would, only philosophers would care about the further question about whether there's really any consciousness there. And some philosophers would say, like Dennett, I don't know what you're talking about. There isn't any further question about whether they're conscious if you've completely explained why, if they behave as if they're conscious and the reasons why they behave they're conscious, the functional aspects of them are the same reasons why we believe we're conscious, then there's nothing. There's no. There would only be a fifth wheel. There would be a further um, the idea that there's an interesting difference could be shown to be uh, false, because it cannot be an interesting difference, because all the interestingness is in how, what people say, what they believe, what they remember, what they, all the stuff that matters is already has already been conceded. So maybe that's part of what I was doing there when I was flipping it on its head. I was basically saying, if you give me a robot with all those abilities to believe things about its own internal states, then by definition you've given me the ability to build a robot that believes that its experiences are private, ineffable, intrinsic, and immediate, and that would seem to be enough for it for the same reasons we do, and that would seem to be enough for it to really have qualia. I'll say one other thing, and this is a different twist. I actually go so far as to say, suppose we do the empirical study, we look inside the brain, and we don't find anything there's no one thing about no one aspect of our experiences that explain why we believe that they're private, intrinsic, ineffable, and immediate. Then maybe that would be a case where we've empirically discovered there are no qualia, that it was an illusion. There wasn't an aspect of experience that has all those four properties. And the explanations for why we thought they had those four properties are very diverse explanations. There's no one unifying. I mean, we have explanations for why we use the term phlogiston, but they weren't united in a substance. They were instead about mistakes and confusions. If that's what our qualia talk is like, then we will have empirically discovered that there are no qualia in us. But here's the twist: we could, in theory, build an artificial system that isn't like that, for which there
Yeah.
is a unified explanation for why it believes all those things. And so then we'd be in the very of saying we don't have qualia, but these machines do.
Interestingly enough, I mean, if we don't, if qualia are found not to exist in Dennett's sense, then are we no different from the large language models themselves? Are we not much the same thing? In fact, I had an interesting thing I tried out as a bit of an experiment before this interview. I went and asked Grok whether Grok experienced qualia. And I had an interesting discussion with Grok. Grok denied that it had any qualia at all. But what I found most interesting was it clearly had some kind of self-awareness in the fact that it could actually talk about itself in those terms.
I am not so persuaded. So I think with the models we have now, I'm talking about the simplest ones. I'm not at all an AI or artificial consciousness skeptic in the long run. I think that eventually I don't see any principled. Nobody's given me a good reason to believe that it will be impossible to create an artificially conscious agent. But that doesn't mean I think that it therefore is possible. There might be some argument that someone hasn't come up with yet. It also doesn't mean that I think they're conscious now or will be conscious in the near future, like the next 5 years or something. And it certainly doesn't mean that I think LLMs or scaled up versions of them, LLM with more compute, with more data, with more training time, with a bigger context window, whatever. It doesn't mean I think that that would guarantee consciousness, or that would be a route to consciousness. So why is that? Why am I skeptical? Well, because it has to do with what we were talking about before with understanding. So right now, LLMs, they only deal in language. And so some aspects of language I conceded you might be able to understand in some asterisk sense of understanding. You might be able to understand someone just by going off the properties of language. But I think some aspects of understanding require, like, it can't, an LLM doesn't have a personal history. So it can't think back to episodes in its personal history in order to check whether or not its experience at that time had this or that property. So when you ask it a question, do you think you have experience? It can't do any of the kinds of reasoning or hypothesizing about the past or about what it would be like for it to have a certain kind of experience, because it doesn't do any of that. All it does is predict the next token based on the previous tokens. And so it's going to come up with something that, given that everything that humans have talked about is very plausible or likely, would be an appropriate thing to say, but it's not for the same reasons that we come up with an appropriate thing to say. We come up with an appropriate thing to say because we have a history, a mental life that we can remember, that we can refer to. This thing talks can talk exactly as if it saw a movie yesterday with its family, and yet it has no family. It has never seen a movie. It has never seen anything, but it can talk the talk. So I think as they are now, they're very useful tools and very entertaining devices, and there's a lot of potential for them. But if you want to create a system that really could answer your question, and you should take its answer seriously, it's going to be a lot more than an LLM. It's going to our language ability is parasitic upon a more primary way of understanding the world. So, the key algorithm in an LLM is the transformer architecture, and it's a very powerful, big advance in AI and machine learning. This thing that can learn what to expect given what it's seen in the past and come up with a very good statistical model. LLMs don't have to be applied to language. They're very useful. The transformation we've seen was by applying it to language. But you can apply it to sensory motor input. I get all these visual inputs, I get all these auditory inputs, I take these actions. What happens if I do that? If you got a transformer to instead be learning about the world on its own, it's not parasitizing data that other people have generated and being trained um, um, in a disembodied way on all that data that other people have generated, but it's generating its own data, its own set of inputs in response to its own actions, and it learns the patterns in that. If you were to do that, you'd be more on the way towards building an agent that has a perspective on the world, that can remember its own past, that can answer questions about what it's like for it. That would be more what it would be like to build an agent that's beginning to be sentient or beginning to have a perspective. And that's why I'm not so impressed with LLMs, because they're jumping directly to the linguistic ability without doing the hard work of building up a there first, having something that could have a perspective.
Let me reverse the question then, because if we take Daniel Dennett's viewpoint seriously, that there are no qualia, and that is all an illusion, we take that to its logical extreme, does that not mean that we are no more than LLMs with a memory?
If I if I really squint hard, if I abstract away from all the interesting parts of that question, and all that's left uh, is Dennett right to think that all we are at root is our physical stuff, and that can be understood on many different levels, but it's still at root physical stuff, and there's no magical, special, non-physical, dualistic stuff coming in, then I would agree with you. Yes, in that sense, we're all LLMs, in the sense that LLMs are just physical stuff without any extra magical dust added. But I think that would be misleading to answer it that way, because I think a lot of people are interested in these particular models and architectures that we have now. And I think that they are so far from having a perspective, and you added on adding a memory. Well, they have a kind of memory in a way now, but the kind of memory I was talking about is just one aspect of what you would have to have in order to really be an agent with a perspective and therefore eventually conscious. You'd have to have all the other things I mentioned. So it's so far away from that I think it's better to say no. We're not just LLMs. We're so much more for the reasons I gave. We don't just have this linguistic ability that isn't grounded in our own personal experience. The way we use language is grounded in how we've interacted with the world and how we learned to use language from our own experience, rather than just being given a training set of how other people have used language. I mean, think about whether LLMs, there's all this linguistic data that they have been given, that we went through the hard effort. We generated all those descriptions of sunsets and discussing an argument with, our partner, or the discussing the great things that happened on our holiday. All those discussions that we have, are data for the LLM, and the LLM now is able to fake discussions about that. We were only be able to produce that text by having gone through the process of having those experiences. So, could an LLM ever generate that kind of text on its own? The only reason, no, the reason why it's able to do that is because it's just cribbing off the sheet of, the people around it that have actually done the hard work and done the studying, that has had the experience, and generate the language for the right reasons. It's generating the answers. It's more akin to somebody who's cheating on an exam than it is to a student who's actually done the hard work of learning the subject and producing the right answer for the right
But
reason.
but surely we're back to the problem of the philosophical zombie here. You have a real person, you have the philosophical zombie. What tests are there to determine which is which? And unless we can come up with a particular test to say, this one's a zombie, this one is not, then they're identically the same, are they not?
So I think we're far from that because right now the LLMs are pretty much only getting the behavior right. They're not getting the behavior right for the right reasons, which I just explained. They're
But then
not,
a
and
physical zombie doesn't get it for the right reasons either, does it?
well, there's this continuum I was mentioning about you can either say it's by zombie you mean something that behaves the same way, but one is really conscious and the other isn't, or you could say it not only behaves the same way, but it actually goes through the same causal internal sequence of states. You could have that
Yeah, yeah,
plus
yeah.
not only does it go through the same sequence of states, but it's also hooked up to the world in the right way. So when it says that cup, it isn't just hallucinating, it isn't just producing some language irrelevantly, it's actually responding to a cup that it is perceived in its environment, and it's saying that cup because it actually is able to see that there is one there, as opposed to an LLM, which might just say it because it thinks the term that cup follows very likely from is a very appropriate thing to say given the training data in this context. Um, then you can go lower and talk about whether it's implemented in the same kind of stuff. And so as you'll recall, I don't think the implementation material is the relevant place to do the test because I'm afraid you might find I don't pass the test. But right above that, where it's the behavior, yes, it has to behave like a conscious thing. Yes, the functional innards have to be it has to be answering, it has to be behaving that way for the right reasons. That is, we'll come up with some kind of computational description of what it is to, when is it the right thing to say when you're the computational reasons mean is it just looking up the answer in a lookup table, like looking at the answers in the back of the book? That's not a good reason. Is it doing it just because it's statistically most likely thing to say? In many cases, that won't be the right reason. It has to be answering for the right because it's gone through the right computational steps or functional steps. And one more, which is the third one I added, you have to be hooked up to the world in the right way. So it can't just be answering, is there a cup in front of you? It can't just be saying that because it's gone through these computational steps the right way. It has to be answering it because it actually looks and sees that there's a cup in front of it. And so it has to be based on information from the world. I think I don't have the test, but I think if you are able to do all that and believe about your own experience, you're disposed, if the machine talks about its own inner life and is disposed to believe that it's private, intrinsic, ineffable, and immediate, I think there isn't any more you could want to know about that system, to know if it's conscious than knowing all that. Um,
Does a lot of, I mean, we've spoken about connecting to the physical world, and one of the big chunks of the physical world recently revealed in the last 100 years, of course, is quantum theory, and there's a quantum world out there. I just wonder, in all of the ideas that we've discussed here, does quantum theory play any part in our understanding of this, or is it something which is completely separate and you don't see it has any connection?
that's a particularly poignant question for me because all my intellectual life that I've been thinking about consciousness back to the 80s, uh, when I first encountered people who thought that there might be a relevance of quantum physics to these questions, I was very skeptical. So all my life I've thought, just because there are two mysteries here doesn't mean they're the same mystery. And explaining one mystery in terms of another mystery isn't too much progress. I was very dismissive, and I'd say only in the last few years have I gone back to reassess some of my argumentation and conclusions. And now I see a glimmer of a way in which there might be um, a an interaction between these two areas. So let's take that question about whether anything physical could be private, immediate, intrinsic, or ineffable. Could the properties of qualia be explained by physics? And Dan Dennis said no, and it seemed reasonable to say that there's nothing private in physics. Well, I think actually he's wrong about that now. I think it is not incompatible with something being physical or knowledge with knowledge of the physical. It's not incompatible with knowledge of the, it's not an incompatibility for something to be knowledge of the physical and for that knowledge to be private. Um, and so I've achieved that under realization through logical reasoning, but then I also noted through discussions with friends and colleagues who are interested in the quantum approach to consciousness that one might be able to find aspects of privacy in our understanding of quantum states. So one of the great interpretations of quantum mechanics, or these different ways of understanding what's going on, was offered by David Bohm, who is no longer with us, but his legacy lives on and maybe is growing even more in terms of the way he understands or understood quantum reality. And his idea was that, and the work of his colleague Basil Hiley, is that the quantum, the particle, has active information about its environment. And there's a different kind of information than we normally talk about on the classical level, but it's a kind of information that is immediate. There isn't any further particle that the environment transmits to the electron to tell it that a slit is open or a slit is closed. It's immediate. And so the particle is able to act on that information in an unmediated way. And the kind of information it has about the experimental setup and its environment seems to be unique to it. So it's private. And if the electron could speak, it wouldn't be able to give that information to any other electron. So I think there are some ways in which maybe, so my friend and colleague Paavo Pulkkinen has put it this way, that when we try to understand how consciousness can be in the physical world, sometimes we're limited because we underestimate what the physical world is like. So there might be aspects of the physical world that already require us to accommodate privacy, immediacy, intrinsicness, and ineffability, or some subset of those. So now the issue is open for me. I'm opening. I'm not, trying to have a more open mind and to see whether
You're,
there might be ways this could be found.
you're not suggesting that the electron has qualia.
Not that I don't think that's required, but if we do find that the electron has that physical things like electrons have some of these properties that we thought were incompatible with physics, then we have to reassess our view about whether qualia are not physically realizable. And so it might be easier to see how qualia are in the physical world if some of its properties are already understandable as being physically realized. It might not be that the electron has qualia, but it might be that the privacy that's there. Now that we know privacy is in principle physically realizable, then maybe we can find qualia at a higher level. So no,
You're
I'm not arguing for panpsychism. No.
not. I just wondered there for a moment. I mean, the idea of privacy is I suppose built into quantum theory, insofar as the uncertainty principle itself will hide information from us, which only the individual might have. So an electron in a particular state, if you try to observe what that state is, will be disturbed by the very observation itself. And therefore, what state it was in is really private to itself and cannot be communicated outside. I had many discussions, I think, with Bohm and Hiley, simply because, of course, they were my dissertation supervisors, my PhD supervisors. It was
Oh, that's amazing. Fantastic.
it's very helpful to come. My own background is quantum mechanics, and we did work on the foundations of quantum theory, but I didn't stretch into the realm of consciousness. But it was moving that kind of way by the time I left. Interestingly
I
enough,
hope I didn't engage in too much Ronsplaining earlier when I was
not at
telling
all,
you
not at
about
all. No, no,
about David Bohm.
no, no.
So yeah, I think you're probably right there that once we have the reason why I'm looking at this view is because it could be that once we have the key of active information that Bohm provided and highly provided, then we can unlock all kinds of reassessments of what's going on with say, like you say, uncertainty principle. We can understand because now that we can understand the particle as having some kind of information about its environment that's different from everyday information. It's not Shannon Weaver information. Um, then we can reassess. Oh, that's what measurement. That's what's going on with the measurement problem, or that's what's going on with it,
The quantum
sorry.
field or the quantum potential or whatever it is and how it connects to consciousness. Um, uh, Ron, we've come roughly to the end of our time, but I did want to ask you one last question, if I may, and that is, from where we stand today and looking forward to the future, 20, maybe 30 years, do you have any particular hopes about this particular field as to what it may reveal or lead to? Or do you have any particular fears about what it might lead to?
Can you narrow down this field? What do you have? What do you have
Well,
in
by
mind?
AI and cognitive science,
Oh, all right. That yeah, there's
and
a
maybe our
wide
knowledge of
range.
ourselves too, you know.
I mean, people talk about the singularity, and I'm mentioning that now not because I'm talking about the way they use it, but I think we're at a kind of singularity in that it's a massive branch point. So there's so many possibilities that have now been enabled because of the advances we're making in technology. And it's not directly. It's not that I think. Let's take quantum computation as an example. So I was asked by a colleague recently, what do you think the big breakthrough will be? And well, there'll be many big breakthroughs, but I think quantum computation will be a big breakthrough, not because, despite what we were just talking about, not because I think quantum computation will provide artificial consciousness or artificial superintelligence directly. Rather, the abilities we will gain because we have quantum computation will be the next step in this recursive self-improving loop. We things are getting faster because our abilities to AI is providing us with abilities to get further faster than we've ever had before. Quantum computation will also do that. So the cartoon, the simplest picture I can paint of it is that we build a quantum computer and the quantum computer helps us build artificial superintelligence or because we have a quantum computer, we can now achieve conscious AI. So I think it doesn't really talk about hopes or fears, but I do
Does
think
it worry you or does it encourage you?
both. Yeah. I can't collapse it all down to a net positive or net negative. I'm very well aware of the downsides, and I don't think so much about the distant downsides like AI takeover or or something like that. I think about the short-term damages to our social fabric or to tyrannical governments using it to oppress or keep the populace in control. People using this technology to harm or control other people. That is the short-term worry. The near-term gains are substantial. In health is a very commonly recognized area where we might see great gains. I think we're already seeing. I personally see great gains in what I'm able to achieve and the thinking I'm able to achieve, just the amplification of my previous abilities because I have these tools. Imagine, we've seen it before with other technologies where, obviously writing, but when computers became more available, we could get more done. I think I'm able to get more thinking done. So when I say get more done, I mean on a higher level, not just tasks being able to be performed, but I've got an interlocutor on tap. Whenever I want to bounce some ideas off someone, yes, I prefer to do it with friends and to discuss it with Philip and with my other friends. But if I don't have that person handy and it's the middle of the night and I want to, hammer out a draft on something, I can try ideas out and get feedback instantly. That's from my perspective as an academic, it's incredible. But I think that it's not just me. I think there are lots of other people who are finding that they can run faster than they could without without this device assisting them. So there's that kind of everyday improvement, but I'm also aware of the everyday downside, the environmental costs, this alienation, the threats to they're all I'm aware of all these. I don't have a simple answer about whether on balance it's going to be a net positive or negative. I guess ultimately I'm an optimist in that I don't think we should have a moratorium on these technologies. I would rather that we be optimistic and try to make the future the better future rather than the negative future. I'd rather take the chance rather than to say no. I'm too afraid. Let's just stay in our shell and not try out this new technology we've discovered.
Ron Chrisley, thank you very much for talking with me today. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.